Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Wyatt Carlton, and today I will be talking to you about the southern resident killer whales of the Salish Sea. This specific group of killer whales has a deep culture in the Pacific Northwest, and my heart personally. For thousands of years, the Native American communities have honored the orca whales as part of their culture. Some tribes believing that the orca whales represent the guardians of the sea. The orca whale represents love, family, and longevity, as the orca whales live and reside in families, known as pods, and reside off the shores of the Pacific Northwest and the Puget Sound. As of right now, there are 3 pods, the J pod, K pod, and L pod. The orca whales also contribute as revenue for the Pacific Northwest, as millions travel the world to see the orca up close and personal. However, population sizes are decreasing in the orca whale pods and are now at its lowest population size in over 30 years at 74 total orcas. There are many contributing factors such as boat and noise trafficking, overfishing, but the most important, and the one I'm going to be discussing today, is runoff pollution. Before we dive into the impact of runoff pollution, we must first understand what runoff pollution is. Runoff is when water cannot be absorbed by the land into groundwater, so it naturally flows across the surface of the earth. An example of maintaining this runoff water is through storm drains. This surface water collects everything that humans leave, such as heavy metals, fertilizers, pesticides, oil, and other toxic, harmful chemicals. These pollutants are then absorbed by small organisms like bacteria and phytoplankton. These phytoplankton are then consumed by zooplankton, and zooplankton are then consumed by herring, and herring then by Chinook salmon, and then Chinook salmon are eaten by killer whales. This process is called biomagnification, and the toxic pollutants build up and accumulate from the smaller species, which are then eaten by the bigger species, building up the pollutants in their tissue, mainly their fat. Biomagnification is a huge problem for orca whales, obviously, because they are the apex predator and at the top of the food chain. The food they consume with toxins is endangering their life sustainability. One of the worst toxins that is carried through biomagnification is polychlorinated biphenyls, also known as PCBs. We know nowadays that PCBs has recently been banned, which is a really good thing, but there still is PCBs throughout the environment. In the summer of 2016-2017, Western Washington University collected data from 10 southern resident whales after doing a blubber biopsy, and they found it out that southern resident killer whales in the Salish Sea are the most PCB-contaminated sea mammals on the planet. These females average PCB levels in their tissue of around 3 milligrams per kilogram in their tissue. That's a lot. The males were a little higher, averaging PCB levels of 5 milligrams per kilogram. Some of the effects of PCBs for killer whales is that it mimics reproductive hormones like thyroxine and threonine. It is also released into the bloodstream for the females during pregnancy, which is very dangerous as it feeds into the fetus, causing higher chances of miscarriages, which is really sad. Southern resident killer whales are extremely unique compared to the other top predators in the world because they rely solely on one individual food source, Chinook salmon. Sometimes here and there they'll eat other salmon like chum or coho or even steelhead, but primarily about 90% of the time, Chinook salmon is their main diet. And Chinook salmon is a huge keystone species in the Pacific Northwest, as it is prey for many different animals, like killer whales, seals, large birds, and bears, just a few to name off the top. These salmon are also prized to be commercially and sport fished. The problem that Chinook salmon come across is that they belong in the family of Salmonida. Sorry if I butchered it wrong, but Salmonida are extremely vulnerable to pollution. They could be argued as an indicator species. Runoff pollution is a huge threat to these Chinook salmon because of the effect pesticides and tire particles have on them. A study by NOAA Fisheries found that a tire compound called 6-PDD is an antioxidant that keeps rubber from breaking off the tire down on the road. This antioxidant turns into a chemical that is highly toxic to salmon called 6-PDD. I might butcher this again. Quinone. 6-PDD quinone can cause death within a couple hours, and if the salmon survives, it has sublethal effects such as impaired growth and cardiac function. NOAA Fisheries experiments highlighted that coho salmon were affected the most when exposed to 6-PDD quinone runoff at nearly 100% mortality rate, when only 5% of 6-PDD quinone was in the stream. That's crazy. Chinook salmon were still affected, but at a much lower rate, a 13% mortality rate. Going into a different chemical, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife wrote an article explaining that Chinook salmon are also affected by, once again, PCB and PBDE poisoning. In spring of 2013, they collected juvenile Chinook salmon from 5 major river systems in the Puget Sound. What they found was around 1/3 of the Chinook salmon sampled had high enough levels of concentration of PCB and PBDE in their system to threaten their health. Some of the effects that PCB and PBDE has on Chinook salmon is stunting growth, less disease resistance, altered hormones and protein levels, and damaged reproductive systems. The purpose for providing these recent studies and explaining the Chinook salmon is because southern killer resident whales only eat from this one food source, and if runoff pollution is killing these salmon and also overfishing, then the lack of food for the orca whales causes decreased reproductive rates and higher mortality rates. And the last topic that I'm going to be discussing about runoff pollution is a silent killer that no one even thinks about when they think about runoff pollution, and it's sediment and algae blooms causing depletion in dissolved oxygen. Dissolved oxygen is so important because it's a big indicator in the quality of water. Generally, the higher dissolved oxygen, the healthier the water is for organisms. So runoff pollution is damaging this because of the amount of nitrogen discharge in the Puget Sound. A study by the Department of Ecology, State of Washington, focused on concentration of nitrogen discharge into the southern Puget Sound south of Tacoma. It found that rivers and runoff streams south of Tacoma Narrows produce an annual mean load of 2,720 kilograms, 6,000 pounds per day of dissolved inorganic nitrogen to South Puget Sound. The significance of excess nitrogen, can cause serious algae blooms, and when algae dies, it depletes into dissolved oxygen, and lower dissolved oxygen then puts stress on killer whales and their prey, which weakens their immune system, reduces their reproductive rates, which ultimately declines the population and hurts these killer whales. These southern resident killer whales are a symbol of the Pacific Northwest, and they are now at the brink of extinction. They not only stabilize the ecosystem, but they also bring in large amounts of tourism of people around the world just to see a glimpse of these amazing apex predators. A story that touched my heart and many others around the world was back in 2018 when Tahlequah member J37 of the J-Pod carried her dead baby for 17 days over 1,000 miles, grieving that her dead baby did not survive. The story went viral, captivating millions around the globe, and mourning with the mother orca for her loss. For me, though, this story was even more personal. Growing up in Washington State from a very young age, I was able to see, experience, and understand the significance of the orca whale population having on the Salish Sea. A close encounter that I can recall was fishing salmon one afternoon off the coast of the San Juan Islands and a pod of orca whales swam right alongside our boat and took our Chinook salmon off our line. It was a crazy experience, and they were probably less than 10 feet away from the boat, which for me at the time, I was terrified, but it was really cool. I also had a really unique experience sitting on the beach at Limekiln State Park during an orca pod coming within 15 feet of the shoreline to skyhop the people standing on the shore. Hearing the orca whales breathe through their blowhole and seeing it firsthand, how they stay together in families and fish in teams together, was so cool, and I'm truly blessed for that moment. I will never forget it for the rest of my life. My goal for sharing this video is to help advocate for preserving these amazing creatures for future generations to see and experience what I've experienced, because I know that is something I will never forget for the rest of my life. There's several different ways that we can start and protect these apex predators for future generations. The first way is through government policy. In neighboring countries like Canada, for instance, whose waterway is a part of the Salish Sea, the government is implementing conservation acts to reduce runoff pollution. They have a Federal Fisheries Act which very clearly states no harmful substances should be discharged into fish-bearing waters. All new municipal sewage plants and all upgrades to municipal sewage treatment plants must comply with federal law by setting secondary sewage treatment as a minimum standard. They're really stopping and implementing the dangerous and toxic chemicals that are being put off through storm drains and whatnot. And that's really important. The second way is through controlling polluting industries. Stopping industries from releasing toxic chemicals like pesticides and PCBs is extremely important. I know now, recently, that the U.S. has banned PCBs, and it's slowly getting better, but there still is a lot that we can do, and industries should be planning for zero toxins released into the environment. And most importantly, what you can do as an individual is the simplest and quickest way by protecting runoff pollution is by cleaning up your everyday activities like lawn fertilizer, pet feces, and to not wash the cars in the driveway, because that causes oil and grease to flow down into the streams, and that's that 6-PDD quinone that runs into the water and kills those fish. That's a big one, to not wash cars, which sounds weird. These small steps can quickly add up to preserving these orca whales to live for 1,000 more years in the Pacific Northwest for generations to come. I just want to say thank you so much for listening to me, and I hope you learned something and can take away from this. Thank you again.
Dad, but there's orcas!
Alright, there you go. See if we got one.
Oh my gosh!
We might lose it. The whales are right on there. Look at those whales, Joey.
I think I'm having a heart attack.
Yeah, you got one. You need the neck?
I would cut it if I were you.
That's the direction.
Where'd they go?
Hey guys! What do you think, Joey? Holy smokes, my fish is freaking out. Yeah, I would be too here. I bet it is. It's coming up, Kevin. Oh, no, he didn't.
Hi! Wow! Did you see that? Mom, he came right next to me. Mom, he came. I have it all.